Yes, hello to you all once again and welcome back to your favourite classic dirt bike TV channel. And if you're into old school vintage dirt bikes, then this is the place to come to see more of those long lost motocross vintage racers from back in the day. Now we do have some interesting bikes lined up for you coming soon here on CDB TV, so if you've not already subscribed to my channel, then please consider doing that very small thing, because we do have some good looking bikes coming up in future episodes of my video channel. So next up we're going to take a look at a bike that I filmed a few years ago now, but it's again one of those Twinshock hybrid machines that have been changed for Twinshock racing. Now this is another fantastic looking machine, and this bike was raced by Cumbrian racer Mark Fulton a few years ago, and I'm not entirely sure if Mark still uses this bike, but it's such a nice looking and interesting build that we're going to take a look at it right now. So without any further delay, let's jump straight into that video and take a look at this Honda CR500 Hybrid Twinshocker. Now you may recall in my last video posting that we had a look at John Fleming's hybrid Twinshock CZ380 racer. Well, this next featured machine is a Twinshock race bike in a similar vein, in that it's a combination of new and old school motocross bike parts that again have all come together to make up another hybrid Twinshock dirt bike. And so our featured machine here at the time of taking these video clips and pictures was owned at that time by Brian Wood, and also at that time the bike was ridden by legendary Cumbrian racer Mark Fulton. Now it was all engineered and put together by ace bike building mechanic Stuart Bland. But as I mentioned in previous videos, these types of hybrid motocross machines are becoming increasingly popular in the Twinshock racing communities, and these big 500 Hondas in particular are certainly the most popular, which basically involves converting a later CR Honda chassis to a Twinshock rear end setup, and then using a later water-cooled Honda motor bottom end, and then switching the top end of the engine to an air-cooled setup. But once all of the chopping and changing and alterations have been made, as you can see, it turns them into quite a formidable Twinshock weapon. Now this featured bike with Mark Fulton as its pilot has had a huge amount of success on the racetrack, and it's brought Mark many race wins in the last few years. But of course Mark's certainly no stranger to motocross racing success, as he was once a works Kawasaki rider many years ago. And in this picture here you can see Mark on the right there with ex-British Evolution bike champion on the left, Gavin Robertson. And so as we begin with the bike's chassis, now the frame on this bike started out its life as a normal 1988 Honda CR frame and swing arm, although there's been some quite meticulous engineering taking place to change it from what would have been a single shock rear end to this earlier Twinshock rear suspension. Now Stuart started out by cutting the frame's entire rear end off and then meticulously measuring all of the remaining parts of the chassis. He then took accurate measurements from a 1981 490 Maico Mega 2 and then transferred all of the Honda and Maico measurements onto a computer where he could see both frame geometries side by side, and then he eventually transformed his finished Honda Maico design to a jig where he could then make up all of the associated rear end parts of the new bike. So essentially the finished machine would end up using the Honda CR500 front end, but with the legendary 81490 Micro Twinshock rear end, and then he would also use a new alloy swing arm which would once more have the same parameters as the older German Micro measurements. And so once all of the chassis work was completed, Stuart then moved on to the bike's power plant, which again had undergone some changes and upgrades, or downgrades, whichever way you want to look at it. Now, if you're an expert on these big Honda engines, you might recognise this as a motor from a 2001 CR Honda, although this particular engine here was, of course, water-cooled in that year and wouldn't be eligible to race in the Twinshock class currently. And so this engine here uses the complete bottom end from the 2001 motor, although the water-cooled cylinder and head has been replaced with a cylinder and head from a 1984 air-cooled bike. And this particular engine here has undergone some significant porting to improve the gas flow, and all of the engine work was done by Frank Rathel of FW Developments, who I have to say did an excellent job in improving the gas flow of this big 500 motor. Now again, because we are now using the newer water-cooled bottom end from a 2000 motor, and we now have an air-cooled barrel and head, the water pump impeller and all of its associated parts are of course no longer required. So this is simply removed and then blanked off to then finish with a hybrid 500cc power plant. But when it's all completed, it does look very neat and tidy, and also as you've come to expect from one of these big 500 two-stroke motors, they're pretty fast as well. And when you see this engine sitting in this Honda frame, it's certainly an awesome piece of kit. Now, when it came to providing the sparks for our hybrid Honda, the original ignition was replaced with a much more upmarket Vortex digital unit to help the sparks fly a little bit better when that big motor was doing its stuff on the racetrack. Now, when it came to feeding the big Honda with its fuel, Stuart kept the original Cayenne flat slide carburetor that came with the 2001 water-cooled engine, and these quality flat slide Cayenne carburetors have plenty scope for tuning and swapping jets around, so it should be an excellent choice when it's bolted onto this CR500 motor. Now, as far as the exhaust system goes on this hybrid Honda project, Stuart just couldn't make up his mind if he should stay with an original Honda exhaust expansion chamber, or maybe try something a little bit different to try and coax more horses from that 500 engine. So the scientific thing to do was to select a few different types of pipes and then fit them one at a time to the engine, and then measure the motor's power output on a dynamometer, and then of course read the results. Now, Stuart did try a selection of pipes, and he even tried tweaking a couple just to try and improve them, but in the end he opted to go for a Pro Circuit pipe that came from a YZ490 Yamaha, which appeared to be the one that gave the best overall performance. And of course the bike's exhaust system was completed by fitting this quite nice Pro Circuit alloy tailpipe at the rear, which again is another very high quality Pro Circuit product. And so as we move on to the front end of the bike, now these quite substantial looking forks are more than likely have been sourced from another machine again, as I was never actually told on the day of their make or origins, although looking at their size and those front hubs. They certainly look distinctly like they could be from a later Honda machine. But again, I'm just guessing here on that point, so there's certainly no need to ridicule me if that's not the case. But they certainly look like they could do a good job on this big 500 machine. Now, when it came to choosing the rear suspension on this hybrid 500 Honda, naturally Stuart had many different makes and configurations of suspension systems to consider, but in the end he opted to fit a pair of these high quality Maxton piggyback units from Maxton Suspensions in Kingswood, Cheshire, right here in the UK. But again, these units are very high quality and tunable to the rider's weight and riding style, and of course they're completely rebuildable with regards any maintenance or servicing. And so as we move on to the bike's fuel tank, which is actually an alloy fuel cell, and this tank here is a period copy of a 1980 CR500 Honda Red Rocket tank. And once more, this custom-made fuel cell was all shaped and fabricated by metal shaping wizard Roger Heap. But this fuel tank here is again just one of the many bespoke custom-made parts that go into constructing this fantastic looking bike. Now, while Stuart was measuring all of the parameters of that Mico frame, he also copied the specifications of the swing arm, and as you know, the original Mico swing arms were constructed in tubular steel, but this time round Stuart used those measurements to make a box section alloy swing arm using the self-same dimensions as the 1981 Mico original. But again, another well engineered piece of kit here that should help keep that rear end of the bike tracking straight and true on even the bumpiest of motocross racetracks. Now, once again, the bike's fork yokes, or triple clamps as they're sometimes referred to, are more customised billet alloy CNC machine parts that have again been specifically manufactured to fit this machine, and that handlebar clamp is again another very special part that's been bolted on to our hybrid 500 Honda. So up front in the bike's controls department, these are made up of a pair of Renthal handlebars that have a set of telly levers fitted onto them, and these brake and clutch levers are supposedly designed to snap open to stop them from braking if the bike lands on one of the levers or if the machine's ever dropped on its side. But on a big open class motocrosser such as this, you certainly need the very best of parts fitting onto the bars just to help you tame and keep that brute of a 500 motor in its place. Although when Stuart started out on this bike build project, this wasn't going to be just another chopped up Honda Mico hybrid bike that had the frame and the motor just thrown together in a couple of weekends. This bike was to be a very highly thought through process that was to be meticulously remanufactured with certainly no guesswork involved, and with the patience and time that it took Stuart to put the bike together, it certainly all paid dividends, as the bike was a complete rocket ship straight from the workshop. And although Stuart has used parts from a later Honda motor, he still tried to keep the bike within the current rules of twin-shock racing. And because of virtue of the fact that it has an air-cooled motor, twin-shock rear suspension and front and rear drum brakes, it certainly qualifies. But despite what you think of, or if you even approve of these kind of hybrid twin shockers taking to the racetracks at vintage or twin shock race events, there's still no escaping the fact here that this has been a well thought through project and executed immaculately by the engineering skills of Stuart Bland. And the icing on this particular cake here is, as I said, that the bike was just super quick right from its very first outing with Mark Fulton as its pilot. And you can take a look at this number 48 bike in action on the racetrack by simply clicking on the link in the video description at the bottom of the page. Well, I hope you enjoyed that walk around Mark Fulton's superb 500 CR Honda Twinshocker. As I said, a bike that was meticulously put together by Stuart Bland. Now that's of course a bike that I filmed a few years ago, so I don't know if Mark's maybe sold the bike on by now, but it was certainly still worth a look here on CDB TV. So coming up in my next video posting, we're going to take a look at another enduro bike, because we have had a few requests for people wanting us to cover some enduro machines. So we're going to put that right in my next video as we take a look at this lovely 1980 PE 175 Suzuki. Now this is another bike that was part of the Terry Pickering classic dirt bike collection, and we'll be scouring the ins and outs of this lovely PE 175 Suzuki when we return for my next video posting. But until then, of course, everybody out there, continue to be safe and well when you're riding those old vintage dirt bikes, and I hope to see you back here again very soon so we can talk about more old school vintage iron right here on your #1 and favourite classic dirt bike TV channel.